Think for yourself. Question authority.
What's up, guys? Welcome back. Now, as you know, as owners of the Nintendo Switch, if you are an owner of the Switch, you know very well that there are quite a bit of bad ports on the Switch platform since it was released in 2017. You name it, the Switch has had it. Some of the worst possible ports or games even that I personally have ever seen on a platform and just even attempted to be done on the Nintendo Switch. Those include like WWE 2018, Ark Survival Evolved, Troll and I, and no doubt many others along the way as well. Now, The Outer Worlds was announced for the Nintendo Switch back in July of 2019, so it's been almost a year, and the game is due to release on June 5th. Of course, people have already been playing the game, there's been reviews out there already, and Digital Foundry did a review analysis of the game running on the Nintendo Switch, and the results were not very good at all. Now, the question we're going to be dealing with here in this video is the game actually a bad port because of the developer who ported the game to the Switch, which is Virtuos? Or is the reason why this port simply doesn't work very well on the Switch is because the game wasn't designed for the Switch in the first place? Is it the engine? Is it the hardware? We'll discuss all of that in this video. So first of all, with Outer Worlds on the Nintendo Switch, it was advertised, mind you, by the publisher as being able to be hitting 1080p docked and 720p in portable mode. And the publisher said this in various interviews that I'll leave links in the description about. And of course, it was suspected that maybe this game would actually be looking pretty good on the Nintendo Switch when it was finally released because of that, hitting those resolutions. As we know, the Switch has had issues with hitting even target resolutions at all from any ports on the system. Even Nintendo's own games being released on the console have rarely ever hit 1080p. We can only just name a few off the top of our head, like Smash Bros. Ultimate and a few other games like that. So really, the Switch has struggled just to hit native resolution on the console, much less 60 frames per second, which is really rare on the console as well. But what we have seen a lot of is games that have dropped resolution and dropped frame rate. Now keep in mind the Outer Worlds was released on the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, Xbox One X, what have you, and PC last year in 2019. So this is already a very late port coming in the midway point of 2020, and the game was already delayed on the Nintendo Switch by Virtuos a few months ago by about 3 months due to the health situation that we're going through, of course. So the game has had over a year in development, give or take, depending on, of course, when they started making the game or porting the game over to the Switch. Fast forward now to today, and Digital Foundry did a analysis of the game and discovered that not only does the game not run at 1080p and docked, but in fact it hits 720p docked most of the time. And in portable mode, it's much worse, rounding out between 384p and 540p while in handheld mode. Plus, what's even worse, however, though, is the frame rate of the Outer Worlds on the Switch is extremely bad, going down as low as 15 frames per second during battle and combat outside in the outdoors. And when you go inside, of course, it cleans up quite a bit, but when you're outside, the game isn't an open world game. When you're outside, the game does hit those low frame rates and around the 20 frames per second all the way down to 15 frames per second, and then jumps back up to 30 frames per second, back and forth. A very juddery, stuttery mess of an experience with the frame rate. And the game looks really bad as well, not just because of the resolution, mind you, but because of the assets of the game being actually removed from the Nintendo Switch port of this game. Not just downgraded, but removed completely from this version of the game, which actually really affects the overall ambience and art style of this very beautiful game when it was released last year. Everyone heralded this game as being a very good looking, pretty game, taking advantage of a very nice art style and setting for a open world game like this from an indie developer, no less. Now, of course, graphics aren't everything, but when they actually are being taken away, not just modified on the Switch to make it look better on the console, but actually being removed, that is a totally different situation. Now, when you have games like The Witcher 3, which obviously were extremely downgraded in terms of its visuals and its resolution, the game still was being made tailor fit for the Switch, and they actually adjusted grass textures and things on the ground, for example, the textures there to make it look better on the specifically for the Nintendo Switch. So the Outer Worlds on the Switch did not have any type of custom-made assets from what it appears. It looks like it was completely just scaled back and removed assets from the game in order for it to run better, I guess, or look better, I guess, even though it doesn't. It actually looks worse. And on top of that, there is other issues with the visuals as well, as far as it having extremely bad pop-in and loading of streaming assets to the game while you're playing it. In fact, some textures don't even load until you're right up close to them, and the game is running very, it has that very flat shaded look to it with no detail on these objects, which happens quite a bit during the gameplay, which you'll see in the video here from Digital Foundry. This is very bad because it's extremely distracting and you can't even see what's going on with the detail in the game, and you get distracted by the visuals. So when you play a game like The Outer Worlds, you want to be immersed in the beautiful world it's supposed to have for you as a gamer, but when you're distracted by things like this in the gameplay and its extremely bad frame rate, it makes it very difficult to play when you can simply just play it on another console at a much more steady 30 frames per second, and on PC, of course, 60 frames per second if you have a good enough PC to run it. So the question is, are these issues with the game due to the porting studio Virtuos, or is it due to the engine it's running? Now, the engine is very interesting because it's Unreal Engine 4. Now, we just talked about in a few videos ago about Unreal Engine 5 being quote-unquote confirmed for the Nintendo Switch, even though they didn't actually say it was confirmed. But obviously, since it runs Fortnite with Unreal Engine 4, it's going to be compatible with Unreal Engine 5 when they move that over, because basically Unreal Engine 5 will be able to run in legacy mode, quote-unquote, from Unreal Engine 4 with the games that previously ran on the old engine to make it forward compatible with the new engine. So yes, the Switch can run Unreal Engine 5, but there's a big problem with the Nintendo Switch current hardware with Unreal Engine 4. And we maybe haven't talked about it enough on this channel. I think I brought it up on Twitter possibly once or twice in a previous video, maybe. But Unreal Engine 4 has had some really bad issues on the Nintendo Switch hardware. It simply just doesn't run well on the Switch in open world games, mind you. In enclosed games, like in very small environments, Unreal Engine 4 works very well on the Nintendo Switch, but in open world environments, there has been quite a few examples now that we have of games that simply don't run very well on the Nintendo Switch. And those include Unreal Engine 4 powered games such as Daemon X Machina, Dauntless, Rime, Ark Survival Evolved. Games like that are in a more open environment simply have had frame rate issues, stuttering, for example, constantly in those games, and a very uneven performance on the Nintendo Switch. And on top of that, those games are not even very good looking games, mind you. They are kind of middle of the line games even for the Nintendo Switch graphically. They're stylized, or they're just plain out poor looking games like Ark Survival Evolved, and they run bad on top of it. So there's definitely an Unreal Engine 4 streaming of assets and frame rate performance issue for the Nintendo Switch when it tries to run Unreal Engine 4 games in open world settings. And it doesn't bode very well for the Nintendo Switch to get ports that will run good for the next generation either, of course, if it can't even run current generations good with Unreal Engine 4. Unreal Engine 5 is an upgraded engine. And Epic Games just talked about recently in an interview, they actually redesigned some of Unreal Engine 5's coding to support PlayStation 5's SSD drive for the extremely fast loading. The fact remains that these games simply are not designed in the way for the Nintendo Switch hardware to run them. The system has a 5-year-old chip in it designed for mobile devices, and basically 7th gen Xbox 360 ports, which of course the Nintendo Switch has been specializing in. And the ports that have worked well for the Nintendo Switch have required extra work by the developers to create, custom assets for those games to work well on the Nintendo Switch. So Virtuos, even though they've been working on the game for over a year on the Switch, it looks like they simply just downgraded the game to a point where they removed content, removed assets from the game to make it simply run on the Switch itself. Now, I don't know about you, but if they're just going to do that, they're better off, sadly, not porting a game like that to the Nintendo Switch. I know some of you may disagree, but if you're going to actually remove and cut out and butcher a game that was originally intended to look a certain way, and then you completely change that for the Nintendo Switch just for it to run at all, maybe to get some lucky sales or something from Nintendo Switch users, I don't think that's a very good strategy, obviously. And then going into this new hardware generation, that's just not going to work. So Virtuos, when they said, hey, we can port whatever game we want, from current generation to the Nintendo Switch, they are technically correct. They can port whatever game they want to the Nintendo Switch. The problem is, what game is left when you port a game like the Outer Worlds, like how they did to the Nintendo Switch? There is a lot less game left over visually for the consumer to enjoy, and there's a lot more visual issues for the gamer to be distracted by when they see a game looking like that on their console. In fact, simply put, they're just not going to buy the game on the Nintendo Switch if it looks like that. And also, to kind of false advertise there by the publisher, you have to admit, by advertising 1080p docked and 720p portable mode, you're putting yourself on thin ice there with consumers, because the game simply does not look like that and it runs poorly on the Nintendo Switch. And sadly, guys, Nintendo still does not have a refund policy on the eShop. So if you pre-ordered it on the eShop, you may be stuck with this purchase, even though it runs bad and looks bad, and you may not have expected it to be that way because you were told something else by the developer and the publisher. Very, very bad precedence is set on this console, especially going into the next generation. And I've seen all the comments online today in reply to my tweets about this game, and people are really seeing the need now for this more powerful Switch to come sooner rather than later. And obviously, I think it's going to be, because they're not going to be getting many sales from consumers if they keep releasing games like this on the current version of the Switch. They're going to have a more powerful Switch to run games simply just better and to look better, to look more basically like the original game they were intended to be ported from. Developers want to have the game look as close as possible to that and not have it butchered and completely cut out like how they're doing on some of these ports on the Nintendo Switch. Yeah, it's not always, the hardware's fault. Sometimes it is a poor port by the developers. But you have to keep in mind, like we talked about, Unreal Engine 4 has had major issues working on the Nintendo Switch, and this is the biggest third-party developer engine available right now, and then it's going to become Unreal Engine 5. So Nintendo has something to think about there for the future with getting more ports, because developers, including indies, are going to be moving to Unreal Engine 5 in the next generation. It's going to become the biggest middleware engine for these developers over the next couple years. So Unreal Engine 4 is simply not running well on the Nintendo Switch right now is not a good sign for the future for other ports from Unreal Engine 5. And yes, the Switch is selling great as a piece of hardware, but also for third-party developers, the software has to have a chance to sell well for them to be successful on the platform. And if you release games like this, they're not going to sell well. Like we know that. You're not going to want to buy a game like that looks drastically different and worse and runs bad at 15 frames per second, 15 to 20 frames per second. Gamers simply just are not going to settle for that at a certain point. Standards have changed in the past 20 years. So definitely you're going to want to have something that's better performing than games like the Outer Worlds on the Nintendo Switch. So that is one reason why a more powerful Nintendo Switch that could run these ports better would be better for the gamer. Like, for me, that's all I want. I want better running games. I want, a higher fidelity, better frame rates, to make them more on par with other consoles so we can enjoy them on our Nintendo console of choice. Now, I can't play, sales figures on my TV screen, right? What you can play, though, is better performing games on your console. That's what we want. And the better quality ports you're going to get on a console, and the better performance you have on them, the more likely you are to buy them as a consumer than you would be, of course, if they're just looking terrible and you're like, well, I'm just not going to buy that anyway. I'm just going to go buy something else on another console. It's about making your platform successful for all developers and giving your port a chance to sell on your platform. So I know 2020 is a crazy year. Anything can happen, as far as announcements are concerned, and things are very, in flux for all these companies. But one thing's for sure, I do not recommend buying the Outer Worlds on the Nintendo Switch, because that wasn't the way the game was intended to be played or intended to look on the Nintendo Switch. It wasn't intended to look that way, guys. If you want to enjoy the Outer Worlds for what it is and for what it was originally intended to be like, I suggest playing it on another platform, at least for this port, because how it is right now simply doesn't cut it. That's just a fact. Alright guys, thank you very much for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, please hit the like button, subscribe for more, and I'll talk to you very soon in the next video. Have a great day.